Hands wouldn't stop shaking on the steering wheel. I kept telling myself to breathe, to focus on the highway, to not look at the video again. But I looked. I always looked. 22 times in the past hour and 40 minutes, I'd watched the same 40-second clip from my home security camera. My 9-year-old daughter, Emma, crouched in the corner of our garage storage room, arms wrapped around her knees, face pressed into her own lap, not crying anymore, past crying. That hollow, silent rocking. That's somehow worse than any sound she could make. My brother-in-law's voice, clear through the audio feed. She's been in there 3 hours. You think she learned her lesson yet? And then my wife, Gail, laughing, actually laughing. She'll not before she talks back again. I was 2 hours outside of Pittsburgh when my neighbor called. Ted Briggs, 64 years old, retired postal worker, man I'd shared a fence with for 6 years. I'd been in Columbus for a 3-day operations conference. My phone was sitting on the passenger seat, Bluetooth connected, when Ted's number came up at 4047 in the afternoon. Scott. His voice was wrong. Too quiet for Ted. You need to come home right now. I'm serious. Something is very wrong over there. I can hear Emma from my yard, and I haven't heard her for a while now, and I'm scared, Scott. Scott, I don't know what to do. I pulled over on the shoulder of I-76 and opened my home security app. Gail knew about the cameras in the living room and kitchen. She didn't know about the garage. 14 months ago, after I noticed a bruise on Emma's arm that Gail explained away as a tumble off her bike, something in me, some instinct I couldn't name yet, made me install 3 hidden cameras I'd bought through a separate account, stored the footage to a cloud server Gail had no access to. I'd hoped I was being paranoid. I'd hoped I'd never have reason to check them. I checked them. My brother-in-law, Gail's older brother Patrick, was sitting in a lawn chair he dragged into the garage doorway. He had a beer. He was on his phone. Behind the locked storage room door, my daughter had been left in a space roughly the size of a large closet. No windows, one working light bulb that, I could see from the footage, had been unscrewed. They'd left her in the dark for 3 hours while they watched football in my living room. I called 2 people before I pulled back onto the highway. First was my younger brother, Joel. He answered on the second ring. I need you at my house. Right now. Don't ask me anything, just go. He said, I'm already getting my keys. That's Joel. 12 years younger than me, works construction, 6'2", and the most loyal person I've ever known in my life. Second call was harder to make. Ray Hutchins. We'd worked together at a loss prevention firm for 8 years before I moved into supply chain management. Ray still worked investigations. More importantly, Ray understood how evidence worked, what made it admissible, and what destroyed a case before it started. He picked up and I said, I need you to do something for me, and I need you to not ask questions until you get there. He said, text me the address. I drove. The September sky went orange and then gray. I watched the highway markers and tried not to think about Emma in that dark room. Tried not to think about how long she'd been in there. Before Ted called, tried not to think about what else I'd missed while I was on the road 3 weeks a month trusting that my daughter was safe. Gail and I had been married for 11 years. Emma was 9, unplanned in the best way. The kind of surprise that rearranges your whole understanding of what your life is for. For the first 6 or 7 years, things were fine. Not perfect, but fine. Then Gail's mother passed and left her a significant inheritance, somewhere around $340,000, and something shifted in Gail that I never fully understood. She became restless, critical. She started spending time with Patrick again, who she'd been largely estranged from for years. And I never liked what that brought out in her. Patrick was the kind of man who found other people's discomfort entertaining. He had a mean streak. He dressed up as humor. Gail had kept distance from him for years before their mother died. After, it was like she reverted to something older, something I hadn't seen before. Emma started having nightmares. She started flinching at loud sounds. She stopped wanting to have friends over. I asked questions. Gail had answers. She's just at that age. She's sensitive. You wouldn't understand because you're never here. That last one landed because it was partially true. My job kept me on the road. I hated it. I've been trying to negotiate a position with more local travel for 8 months. Gail knew that. She encouraged me to keep taking the longer assignments. I thought she was being practical about the money. I understand now what she was doing. I pulled into my neighborhood at 6:31 in the evening. There were 2 Allegheny County Sheriff's vehicles parked on my street, lights going, an ambulance in my driveway. Ted was standing on his front lawn with his wife, Carol, and when he saw my truck, he crossed the street at a pace I'd never seen that man move at before. "Joel got here 40 minutes ago," he said. "I called 911 right after I called you. Emma's okay, Scott. She's okay. The paramedics have her." I looked past him. Patrick was on my front lawn, hands zip-tied behind his back, talking loudly at a sheriff's deputy about his rights. Gail was sitting on the front steps in handcuffs. Her sister-in-law, Patrick's wife Donna, who I had apparently missed on the camera footage, had been inside the whole time, was standing near a deputy, crying. 2 other relatives I recognized from holidays were similarly detained. Joel walked toward me from the side of the house, and the look on his face, relief mixed with something harder underneath, made my throat close. "She's in the ambulance," he said. "She asked for you. She wouldn't let them take her anywhere." Ray appeared behind him. "I got everything uploaded to the cloud backup before the deputies arrived," he said quietly. "Every file, time-stamped, chain of custody intact." I walked the lead deputy through the system. "It's solid, Scott. It'll hold up." I nodded and moved past them both. Emma was sitting on the back step of the ambulance wrapped in a silver emergency blanket even though it wasn't cold. She was still in her school clothes from that morning. She'd apparently been locked in the garage not long after Patrick arrived at noon. One of the paramedics, a young woman who couldn't have been 30, had her hand over Emma's and was talking to her softly when Emma looked up and saw me. She didn't say anything. She just came off that step and hit me with her full weight, and I caught her and held on, and for a while neither of us said a word. When she finally pulled back, she looked up at me with those dark eyes she got from my mother, not Gail's side of the family, and said, "Uncle Patrick said you knew. He said you didn't care and that's why you weren't here." She paused. I didn't believe him, but then it got really dark and I wasn't sure. Something inside me, something I don't have a name for, came loose when she said that, not breaking down. The opposite, a stillness. The kind that comes before something deliberate. "I'm here," I said. "I'm always coming. No matter where I am, I'm always coming." The paramedics wanted to take Emma to UPMC Children's Hospital for a full evaluation. I rode in the ambulance with her while Joel followed in his truck. The emergency attending who examined her, Dr. Patricia Nguyen, documented everything with a thoroughness I was grateful for. No physical injuries beyond mild dehydration, but she noted the tension in Emma's body, the way Emma flinched at unexpected movement, the careful, evasive quality of some of her answers. "This isn't the first time something frightened this child," Dr. Nguyen said to me, not as a question, when Emma had been taken for a brief imaging scan. "The way she monitors exits and movements, that's learned behavior, that develops over time." "I know," I said. "I didn't know how much until today." She was a mandatory reporter. Everything was already being documented. Emma's file would be flagged and sent to Allegheny County Children, Youth and Families Department by morning. Dr. Nguyen looked at me for a long moment and then said, "She's lucky she has you." I didn't feel lucky. I felt like I'd been asleep at the wheel for months while my daughter learned to be afraid. Joel met us at the hospital with a bag from Target, new pajamas for Emma, a stuffed elephant she'd noticed at the store on a shopping trip 6 months ago, and mentioned once, the kind of thing only Joel would have remembered. He'd also bought her 3 boxes of Cocoa Puffs, which had apparently been banned from the house because Gail felt sugar cereals were beneath them. Emma, pale and quiet in her hospital bed, looked at those 3 boxes and said, "Are those all mine?" Joel said, "Every single one." She slept that night in the hospital room with my hand over hers. I sat in the chair beside the bed and didn't sleep at all. Around 2 a.m., a text came from Ray. Found something in the extended footage, not just today. You need to hear audio from 3 months ago. Don't open it until you're somewhere you can handle it. I looked at Emma sleeping. I went to the hallway. The audio file was 42 minutes long. Ray had pulled it from a recording I hadn't even known was there. Emma's tablet had a voice memo app she used for school, and apparently Emma herself had started recording conversations without fully understanding why. The way children do when they feel something is wrong, but don't have the language for it. The tablet had been synced to the same cloud account as her school files, which Ray had accessed through the emergency contact information I'd given him. I stood in a hospital hallway in Pittsburgh at 2 in the morning and listened to my wife tell her brother that she was planning to file for divorce as soon as she could get me to sign revised paperwork that her attorney had been quietly preparing for 4 months. The settlement she was pushing for would have given her the house, primary custody, and a monthly payment structured around my salary. More importantly, it would have given her unfettered access to a joint investment account and a real estate trust I'd established with part of Gail's inheritance specifically to protect Emma's financial future. I had been the one to insist that money be put in structured accounts rather than spent freely. Gail had resented it. The audio made clear exactly how much. Patrick's voice, what if he fights the custody? Gail, he travels 30% of the time. Any judge will see that as instability, and by the time we're done with what we have on Emma, she's going to be very hard to read as a reliable witness. Patrick, you're talking about your own kid. Gail, I'm talking about a 9-year-old who throws tantrums and has attachment issues and already sees a therapist. No judge in Allegheny County is going to take her word over mine with a documented history of behavioral problems. I had to stop the recording. I leaned against the wall and looked at the ceiling and breathed. Emma's behavioral problems. The therapy she'd started 11 months ago. I'd been the one to push for the therapist because Emma was having nightmares and Gail had agreed too easily. Now that I thought about it, and I understood now what that agreement had been about. A paper trail, a record of a struggling child, manufactured evidence for a custody case built on a foundation of deliberate harm. I finished the recording. By the end, I understood the full shape of it. This wasn't a marriage that had gone cold. This was a plan that had been running for at least a year. Separate Gail from the child's financial protection. Document Emma as unstable. Win custody. Control the money. Patrick's role had been to intimidate Emma during the periods I was traveling, to enforce a fear-based compliance that would make her an ineffective witness to anything she'd experienced. Today hadn't been exceptional. Today had just been the one Ted witnessed. I went back to Emma's room and sat with her until morning. At 9 a.m. the next day, I met with Detective Alicia Moreno from the Allegheny Sheriff's Department and the county's Child Abuse Investigations Unit. Ray was there. Joel was there. I brought the audio file, the complete security footage archive going back 14 months, and documentation of the investment accounts Gail had been attempting to access. Detective Moreno listened without expression for a long time. Then she said, "Mr. Tanner, what you have here is not a single incident. This is a documented pattern of child abuse in furtherance of a custodial fraud scheme. We're going to be filing charges today." The charges against Patrick were substantial: child endangerment, false imprisonment of a minor, conspiracy to commit child abuse. Patrick's wife Donna, who had been present in the house and had done nothing, faced charges of failure to report and complicity. 2 other relatives received similar charges at reduced levels. Gail's charges were the longest list: child abuse, child endangerment, conspiracy, custodial interference, fraud. The DA's office added a charge related to the financial scheme, characterizing the manipulation of Emma's trust accounts as financial abuse of a dependent. When Detective Moreno called me the following afternoon to walk me through the charges, she said, "Your wife's attorney is going to tell her to take a deal. I'd be surprised if she doesn't." Gail didn't take a deal. The trial took 8 months to reach. By then, Emma had been in intensive therapy with a specialist in childhood trauma at Children's Hospital. We were living in an apartment in Fox Chapel, smaller than the house but with a yard, which Emma had specifically asked for, and 3 cats which I had not planned for. But here we were. Joel lived 12 minutes away. Ted and Carol came for dinner twice a month. Emma had started painting, watercolors, mostly, big soft washes of color that her therapist, Dr. Eileen Park, said were a sign of a child re-establishing her sense of safety through creative expression. I put them on the refrigerator and the walls and every flat surface that could hold one. I also made calls, the kind I'd spent the quiet hours of those hospital nights figuring out. Patrick had been collecting state disability benefits for a back injury while running a landscaping operation on the side. I knew this because I'd watched him haul a 40-pound paver at a family barbecue 3 summers ago. A former colleague at the loss prevention firm, a man named Wade, owed me a significant favor from a case we'd closed together years back. Wade had contacts in the Pennsylvania Department of Labor and Industries fraud unit. Within 3 weeks, Patrick's disability claim was under formal investigation. His benefits were suspended. Charges for benefits fraud were filed before his child abuse trial even concluded. Patrick's wife, Donna, had been trying to open a daycare center. She had a pending application with the state for a child care facility license. That application was now pending review in light of her arrest. It was denied 4 months later. Gail's sister, who had not been involved in the abuse but had known something was wrong for months and said nothing, had a real estate license in Allegheny County. Real estate licensing in Pennsylvania requires a background check and a character review. Her renewal was now a significantly more complicated process. I wasn't violent, I wasn't illegal, I was methodical and I was patient, and I understood from years of supply chain management that the most effective disruptions aren't dramatic. They're structural. You find the load-bearing elements of someone's life and you document, report, and wait. By the time Gail's trial began, Patrick was already serving a 9-year sentence for child endangerment and conspiracy. Donna had received 3 years supervised release. The other relatives had received various sentences, none shorter than 2 years. The DA's office, in preparing for Gail's trial, had also uncovered something I hadn't known. In the months before everything came apart, Gail had increased my life insurance policy. I had a $2 million policy through my employer that she had quietly changed the beneficiary on, removing Emma and substituting herself, using a forged spousal signature on the amendment form. When Detective Moreno called to tell me this, she said it in the tone of someone delivering information they've rehearsed. "The forgery is straightforward," she said. "What we're looking into now is whether the policy change was the only step in a larger plan." It wasn't. There were emails between Gail and a man I'd never heard of, a contact in the Columbus area, where I had been regularly for work, discussing arrangements in language that wasn't quite explicit enough to charge directly, but was explicit enough, combined with the insurance changes and the documented pattern of fraud to constitute circumstantial evidence of conspiracy. The DA added a charge of conspiracy to commit murder. The forged insurance document was physical evidence. The emails provided intent. I found out about this the same week Emma came home from therapy and showed me a painting she'd made, a yellow house with a big yard, 2 figures standing outside, and above them a very large, very orange sun. She pointed to the 2 figures. "That's me and you," she said, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "And that's our house." We didn't have a yellow house. We had a rental apartment with beige walls. But Emma was painting what was possible, not what was current, and I looked at that painting for a long time. The trial was 3 weeks. Gail's defense argued diminished emotional capacity, marital duress, a pattern of controlling behavior on my part that she claimed had driven her to desperate decisions. Her attorney, a woman named Caroline Marsh, who had clearly drawn a very difficult client, presented a version of our marriage that I barely recognized. According to Gail's testimony, I had been emotionally absent, financially controlling, dismissive of her needs, and had turned Emma against her from an early age. The prosecutor, an aide named James Whitfield, played the recordings, all of them, including the ones from Emma's tablet, including the 42 minutes from the hallway conversation I'd listened to at 2 a.m. in the hospital. He played them in sequence with timestamps, and the jury watched Gail's face while they listened to her own voice describe her daughter as a tool for legal strategy. He also played the 16-second clip from the security camera. Gail at the top of the garage steps, her brother's voice saying something about betting, and then Gail's laugh. Clear, easy, unbothered. Her daughter had been in the dark for 3 hours, and that was the sound Gail made. The jury deliberated for slightly over 6 hours. Guilty on all counts. Sentencing was 3 weeks after the verdict. Emma was 10 by then. She'd asked to come. Dr. Park supported the decision for the same reasons her counterpart had in the original case. Closure, the validation of consequences, the importance of a child seeing that the adults in her life took what happened to her seriously. Emma sat beside me in the courtroom in a green sweater she picked out herself, drawing in a small sketchbook she carried everywhere now, and when Gail was let in, Emma watched with an expression that was old and careful and entirely her own. Judge Catherine Elmore had been on the Allegheny County bench for 19 years. She reviewed the case materials with an attention that was visible even from the gallery. When she spoke slowly. Ms. Tanner, in the course of this proceeding, this court has reviewed documentation of a sustained pattern of abuse carried out against your own child over the course of at least 14 months. This was not a single act of poor judgment or uncontrolled emotion. This was deliberate. It was strategic. It was designed to cause harm to a child who depended entirely on you for her safety, and it was done in coordination with others for financial gain and at significant cost to the psychological welfare of your daughter, who will spend years recovering from what you chose to do to her. She paused. This court sentences you to 22 years in a state correctional facility with no possibility of parole for 15 years. Your parental rights are hereby terminated, effective immediately, pursuant to the findings of this court and in the interest of the minor child's welfare. Gail said something. I couldn't hear it clearly from where we were sitting. She was crying, and what reached me was something about being sorry, about not meaning for it to go this far. Her attorney put a hand on her arm. Emma looked up from her sketchbook. She watched her mother for a moment without any particular expression, the way a child looks at something they've already made peace with. Then she looked at me. "Can we get lunch after?" she asked. I laughed, actually laughed, out in the open, in a courtroom, and I didn't care. "Yeah," I said, "wherever you want." She went back to her drawing. The parental rights termination was handled in a separate family court proceeding the following week, with fewer people and quieter energy. Emma had prepared a statement. Dr. Park had helped her write it, though Emma had insisted on the wording. She stood up and read it in a voice that was steady enough to make the court-appointed guardian ad litem visibly emotional. "My name is Emma Tanner. I'm 10 years old. I am asking this court to make it official that Gail Tanner is not my mother anymore, legally. She made choices that hurt me on purpose, and she let other people hurt me too. I don't want to be legally attached to someone who did that. My family is my dad and my Uncle Joel, and my neighbors Ted and Carol, and Dr. Park, and the people who show up. I want that to be what my paperwork says." The judge, a different one, family court, a tired-looking man in his mid-60s who had clearly presided over a lot of difficult hearings, read Emma's statement twice before he responded. "Motion granted," he said, and his voice was gentle. "Ms. Marshall, Tanner's parental rights are permanently terminated. Emma's legal family is as she has described it." Emma folded her statement paper carefully and put it in her sketchbook. In the months after, the civil side of things unspooled the way Ray had predicted it would. The forged insurance amendment triggered a separate fraud investigation through the insurance carrier. The financial scheme Gail had built around the investment accounts and the real estate trust was unraveled by a forensic accountant Joel and I hired through a referral from Ray. The trust, which Gail had been systematically funneling money out of through a series of small transfers to a separate account she'd hidden from me, was reconstituted. The recovered funds were placed in a proper custodial account for Emma, overseen by a court-appointed trustee and myself jointly. Patrick lost his disability fraud case and was ordered to repay 4 years of fraudulent benefits plus penalties, nearly $90,000 he did not have, resulting in asset seizure. His house, the one he'd bought on my street 6 months after his mother died, with what I now understood was a portion of money that was supposed to be distributed equally among siblings, was listed for sale to satisfy the judgment. Gail's hidden accounts were identified, frozen, and liquidated to satisfy the various civil judgments filed by family members she'd defrauded over the years. Yes, there were others. The forensic accountant found evidence of at least 4 separate instances of Gail taking money from relatives under the guise of investment management. By the end of the second year, the Tanner and Brennan network that had been operating as a quiet machine of small cruelties and financial manipulation for over a decade had essentially dissolved. Patrick in prison, Donna on supervised release and prohibited from any childcare work, the other relatives with records and judgments and fractured reputations, Gail with 22 years ahead of her and nothing to return to when she surfaced. Emma and I moved in the spring. A house in Wexford, 3 bedrooms, a yard, the yellow walls Emma had requested for the kitchen, and no garage at all, which was the first thing she checked when we toured it. She walked through every room with a seriousness that made the realtor, a cheerful woman named Beverly who had no idea what she was witnessing, noticeably quiet. At the end, Emma stood in the backyard and looked up at the oak tree in the corner. "Can we put a swing on that?" she asked. We put a swing on it that weekend. There's a particular afternoon I keep coming back to, about 8 months after we moved in. Emma was in the backyard. I was in the kitchen watching through the window, drinking coffee. She was sitting on the swing with her sketchbook, not drawing, just sitting, and the light was coming through the oak tree in that specific way it does in October in western Pennsylvania, gold and specific, and she was just existing in it, not vigilant, not monitoring, just there, in the light, her feet dragging the grass, unhurried. I watched her for a long time. Joel came by that afternoon, and we sat on the back porch while Emma ran around the yard doing something involving a complicated system of sticks she declined to explain. He said, "You know when I knew she was going to be okay?" I said no. He said, "When she argued with me last month about whether Cap'n Crunch was better than Cocoa Puffs. No scared kid argues about cereal." He had a point. I get calls sometimes from people who found the court records or the news coverage. A brief local story ran early in the case, then a longer piece after the conviction. Usually it's parents asking how I knew something was wrong, what the warning signs looked like. I always answer, because Ted answered when Emma needed him to, and Ray answered and Joel answered, and those calls are why Emma is sitting in an oak tree shadow right now instead of somewhere else. The answer is always the same. The smallest signs are the ones that don't make noise. Emma stopped laughing in her sleep. Emma stopped asking if I could stay home. Emma started apologizing for things that weren't her fault. Children don't behave that way when they feel safe. When a child becomes small and apologetic and watchful, something taught them to be that way. Document everything. Call someone. Don't wait until you're certain, because by the time you're certain, the child has been waiting longer than you know. The hotline for the Child Help National Child Abuse Hotline is 1-800-422-4453, available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. If you suspect a child is being harmed, that number exists because someone will answer it. Emma turned 11 last month. She had 7 friends at her birthday party, which was the largest social gathering she'd voluntarily participated in since I could remember. She made her own cake, lemon with white frosting, and put 11 candles on it and blew them all out on the first try. Joel asked her what she wished for. She thought about it for a second and said, "I already got it." I didn't ask her what she meant. Some things you just hold. I think about Ted a lot, a 64-year-old retired postal worker who was out gardening on a Tuesday afternoon and heard something that didn't sound right, and instead of convincing himself it wasn't his business, he picked up the phone. That one decision changed everything. Not my planning, not my cameras, not Ray's evidence work, all of that mattered. But none of it gets activated if Ted doesn't make that call. The whole chain starts with one person choosing to act on what they knew was wrong instead of looking away. That's something I've turned over in my mind more times than I can count. We talk about good people like they're rare, like integrity is some exceptional quality that only certain people are born with. But I don't think that's it. I think most people know when something is wrong. The difference is whether you act on it. Ted acted, and Emma came home. What Gail and Patrick did wasn't complicated. When you strip it down, they counted on silence. They counted on Emma being too young to articulate what was happening, too afraid to be believed, too conditioned to stay quiet. They counted on me being absent enough and trusting enough not to look closely. They built a whole scheme on the assumption that people around them would either not notice or not do anything. Ted broke that assumption in one phone call. I've thought about what I could have done differently. The honest answer is I missed things I shouldn't have missed. Emma stopped laughing in her sleep. She started apologizing for accidents that weren't her fault. She stopped asking me to stay home when I left for trips. I noticed those things, and I filed them under "she's going through something" without pushing hard enough to find out what. I was working, I was tired, I trusted the wrong person, and I told myself the small signs were nothing. They were never nothing. When a child becomes careful and watchful in small, something made them that way. I know that now in my bones. What pulled us through wasn't luck. It was every practical decision made clearly under pressure. Installing those cameras, building the evidence archive, calling Ray first instead of driving back in pure rage, letting the legal process work while also making sure every accountability structure around Patrick and Gail was activated. That's not something that happens on instinct alone. It requires thinking straight when your hands are shaking. Emma needed me to be both, present enough to feel everything and disciplined enough to not let the feeling make me reckless. I'm not sure I always got that balance right, but I tried. Emma blew out 11 candles last month and told Joel she'd already gotten her wish. I keep coming back to that. A child who spent 14 months being systematically frightened got to a place where she felt full enough to say that. That didn't happen because justice was served, though it was. It happened because people around her showed up, consistently, over time, and let her learn that safety was real. Healing isn't a verdict. It's a Tuesday afternoon on a backyard swing with the October light coming through the oak tree, and nowhere she has to be afraid. Whatever you're carrying right now, whatever situation you're watching from the outside and telling yourself isn't your place to say something about, Ted was just a neighbor. He didn't have special training. He wasn't sure he was right. He made the call anyway. That's the whole thing. That's all of it.